Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
The transformation of parking, mobility, and transportation in Memphis, tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. I'm joined tonight by Tommy Pacello, who heads up the Memphis Medical District Collaborative. Thanks for being here again.
Thank you.
Suzanne Carlson handles transportation issues for Innovate Memphis. Thanks for being here. Paulo Nunez-Bueno is a national consultant on parking and transit issues from Seattle, but works around the country. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And Madeline Favors, reporter with the Memphis Daily News. So I'm going to start with you, Tommy. And one of the first conversations I think we had ever when we met, it was, if not the first, one of the first, was about surface parking. Right. And so when this came up, that you at the Memphis, the medical district are focused on these parking issues, I was like, we got to do a show on this. And we'll talk a lot about the medical district and everything you're doing, but the issues are really broader. They're applicable to all over the cities, the cities around the country. But why, let's just start with surface parking, because I was trying to remember this conversation we had, and you talked about the ills and problems of surface parking in a way that I had never really thought about it. And it did change how I look at areas of downtown, the medical district, and so on. So talk about, again, surface parking in the medical district and the problems, the many, many problems it creates.
Sure, and the Memphis Medical District has, there's a lot of stuff going on there, right? We've got 24,000 employees and students that are there every day, but only 3% of the employees and about 6% of the students are living in the district. That means a lot of them are commuting in and out. And the institutions themselves that are there have done a good job of providing ample, affordable parking for the way that people get in and out of the district. But we also know that the preferences are changing. We surveyed 2,200 of the employees, students, and residents in the district, and we found that they're coming to the district transit train, but the transit isn't in place to receive them. So as a result of the infrastructure that's been built out around how people are getting into the district, what we've seen is we have about 270 acres of surface parking lots in the district. That's commercial and institutional uses. So just for a point of reference, that's about the size of Harbor Town as a big giant surface parking lot. Yeah. 110 of those acres are owned by the institutions. And so this individual institution's approach to parking has, like I said, been good. But what we want to say is, like, if we took a collective approach, we think that we can be much more efficient and unlock the potential of those surface parking lots to be other things, buildings or apartments or houses or whatever it happens to be that's in the need for that area, if we just managed this in a more comprehensive way. And so our conversation about this is just starting, and it's the start of a collective conversation about how we deal with surface parking lots and parking generally in the district.
One thing you said is, and we quoted you, I think Madeline quoted you, that parking is less interesting than when you look and you drive. And I drive through the medical district on the way home from our office almost every day, and I've thought about statements like that you've made, that it sort of disrupts the landscape. You have a beautiful park, maybe a nice architectural building, but these things matter to people in a way that we didn't used to talk about, I think.
Well, I think that's right. I think if you want to build a really great place, one of the things is it has to be lovable. And there's not a whole lot that's lovable about surface parking lots.
Right, with the chain link fences and the paint and all that. And the trash that collects on them.
And a lot of these parking lots started as a temporary use, right? We're going to eventually put a building on the lot, but it just maybe didn't quite materialize as quickly as it was intending to.
Yeah. So Suzanne, for your perspective on this in Innovate Memphis, and we'll talk maybe towards the end a little bit more the broader mission of Innovate Memphis and so on. But how does this tie to, from your perspective, to changes in terms of bike lanes and Green Line and just different ways of thinking about people getting around Memphis? MATA has new leadership, 2 years, 3 years of new leadership, and just announced a bunch of changes to bus routes and so on. How does this tie into other changes and maybe even other areas of the city that are beginning to look differently at where people live, how they get there, and so on?
Sure. So the work I do at Innovate Memphis is to improve transportation choices for everyone and to get more people using it. So we're partnering with the Memphis Medical District Collaborative, and in a way it's a case study. So it's an area of town where we've got a great partnership and participation from the institutions and some willingness to try new things. And we're hoping that we can replicate that throughout the city. So I do work closely with MATA and with the city on providing those resources. One thing we need is more investment in all those resources. So when we look at the amount that we're spending on parking, if we think about some investments we can make in transit, we could have much higher frequency and getting more people to use transit because it's more available. So right now it might be a challenge for people to take transit if it's not available to them. You mentioned bike lanes, those are coming throughout the city, so we're working to get more people using those and activate them. And part of that is really perception too. So we perceive that we've got a lot of people driving on our roads, but we don't always see the bicyclists using the lanes. So they're out there, they're using it, it's a valued resource. So we're really looking citywide to improve the resources available, but then also the incentives. So working with employers, we can look at incentives differently. Right now the assumption is that our employees will drive, and so we'll provide free parking. People who are taking transit usually bear that financial burden for themselves, right? They're buying their own transit passes, and they have to get to the transit center to buy the pass.
Right.
So if the pass was available through the employer on an equal financial footing, then we'd be providing that as a great resource.
It's so funny you're saying that because we pay for our employees' parking downtown. I mean, I've never thought, and we do in our office in Nashville, and I've never occurred to me that I would pay for someone's bus passes. I mean, but why? I mean, I'm gonna.
Right.
I think we'll
Right.
maybe offer that up. And there was also a thing. Go ahead.
So City Hall is leading by example. They have just provided a universal transit pass to all their employees. And the great thing about it is it's their ID badge. So every ID badge that they're already carrying, because they use it to get into the building every day, they can now show on a bus or a trolley and get a free ride, free to them.
Yeah, yeah. And so, Paul, you're based in Seattle. You've done a lot of work up there with transportation issues and so on. But what's your perspective on Memphis, on the medical district specifically, and just your perspective on these issues as they're playing out here relative to other cities?
Well, I think that, first of all, the fact that the conversation is happening and that the medical district players are engaged in these issues is really, really hopeful. Because this is really about sort of starting the conversation now and being thoughtful about growth in the future and being very intentional about the kinds of places that we want to build, the kinds of offerings that they want to have for staff, for faculty, for the patients, for the students that are there. And oftentimes people build the parking and build these things as an afterthought without being thoughtful and looking into the future. So I think that that's a very hopeful thing. And there's lessons here that can apply to other places in the city. I had never been to Memphis before, and I'm so impressed with the town. It has a great energy. It has a great feel. I think all the pieces are in there in place for it to be an amazing city, an incredible place. And transit and transportation is part of that. And getting people engaged in the conversation around that is really important.
And then I'll go to Madeline in just a second. So following up, I mean, I grew up south of Seattle a long time ago, but I still up there from, we talked before the show. People think that Seattle is this, kind of progressive city. It's got transit. It's very, pro mass transit and so on. But it was, when I lived there 30 years ago in that area, it was car culture. And it still has massive highways that are clogged like you picture Los Angeles. And there's still a lot of challenges. Has a really good bus system and is far ahead of cities like Memphis in terms of bike lanes. But talk a little bit about lessons learned there with Seattle having boomed so much and been really designed and built around the car and highways and trying to transform that after the fact.
Right. Well, I think one of the lessons there is that we're not looking for sudden changes, that we need to engage in incremental changes over time and provide just the kinds of things that Suzanne was talking about, to look at those kind of unintended barriers that we may be putting up for people to choose to take transit or to ride their bikes or to carpool. And those things are really kind of long-term behavior changes. One of the things that Seattle did, and that I think is happening here to great effect, is engaging the large employers, because the large employers really have a lot of impact in the choices that people make, in terms of not just whether they provide transit passes, whether they provide end-of-trip facilities for bicyclists, but in the kind of expectations that they set for their employees, but how they design their campuses also. So in the institution where I used to work at Seattle Children's Hospital, we were very, very intentional to build the hospital in such a way that the front door was easily accessible from the transit stop.
Yeah.
Both for staff and for patients and families who are coming to the hospital, because we wanted to make that the intuitive choice.
Yeah. Okay, Madeline. Go ahead, Tony.
I just want to add one more thing to that. I think that people inherently do whatever's easiest. Right. And so something that you said is you made it very easy for Seattle Children's to make, for transit to be right at the front door.
Right.
And I think that because people do whatever is easiest, what we're really talking about, and especially as part of this incremental shift, is just beginning to make some of these other options easier. And that then, in theory, brings down your demand for the surface parking lot.
Yeah, yeah.
Paulo, as you said, it's so important for employers to put an emphasis on sustainable transportation. And we think of transit as kind of a public concern. Why is it something that's important to a private entity? What's the benefit there?
Oh, right. I think that when the vast majority of employers, when they start looking at the data, they will see that they're more dependent on transit than they realize. That a greater proportion, just like you said, well, I didn't realize that we were subsidizing parking, but all of the folks that are coming there on transit are paying out of their pocket, that most employers don't realize that they really need the transit in order to get their staff there. And so what I would encourage the continuing to do is to encourage the big institutions to do a survey. How many people actually take transit now?
Or and how many would?
And then how many would? But I think that one of the discussions that I heard in Memphis a lot is that people sort of undervalue the transit that's here. But I think it's vital. I'm sure that there are many routes that are working very well and that are cherished by the people that use it, and we need to build on that success.
Yeah, yeah.
And Suzanne, you've been working with employers as part of the Commute Options Initiative. You mentioned the bus passes. What are some of those other incentives that employers can provide to their employees to take alternative transportation?
Right, so part of our process, as Paulo was mentioning, is a survey to find out what people's barriers are to taking transportation choices to work. One of the biggest ones is not just the convenience, but also the reliability of having your automobile. So there's a program called Guaranteed Ride Home or Emergency Ride Home that if something comes up with your family or your kids at school and get sick, you have to rush out of work immediately, it pays for a free taxi ride. And that's proven very successful and low cost because people rarely use it, but it provides that guarantee, which is exactly what it's for. You know you have to leave in an emergency and you have that option. Another option is a shared car at work. So we're working with Zipcar to bring them closer to the employers. We're working with, then if you have errands, it could be for personal reasons, it could be an emergency, or you just have to go pick up something during the day, you can get a car at work.
What is Zipcar, for those who don't know? Because it's here, and it's been here a while, but it's not as widely used as in some other cities. So define Zipcar, and there's a competitor. I don't want to get...
Right, so I only mentioned the name because that is the one that's in Memphis.
Okay, yeah,
it's
we
a
can focus on
car
that.
sharing company. So you sign up, you become a member, you have a card that's the size of a credit card, make a reservation. I have an app on my phone, it's super easy. You just call up the car and see what time it's available, plug in that you want to use it between, let's say, 1 p.m. and 2 p.m. for your lunch hour. You go to the car and you swipe your card, it opens up, you drive the car, you bring it back, $10.
To people who grow up, I mean, in most American states are car culture, I mean, a few exceptions, it's the strangest thing. Because and to get in one, it's like a rental car that's just parked on the street and there's a sign next to it that says Zipcar and you kind of wander by, and if you don't know what it is, how could that possibly be safe and not get stolen and work? But it's increasingly common across the country.
Well, one of our speakers yesterday talked a lot about the shared economy.
Yeah.
It's coming. So the rideshare companies are wildly popular, right? People are not bringing their own car, especially if they're going out drinking. They want to get a
Uber
ride
and
and
Lyft
have someone give them a ride home. So bike share is coming. Car share is already here. There's ways that we can spend less on transportation and be multimodal. I think that's the way of the future too, is we're going to be using all these choices. In a given day, I might bike to work, leave my bike there, go with Tommy. We all carpool today, so I might get a ride to a meeting, get back to work, take my bike and go home, or I might take transit home that day because of some particular need I have. So having that kind of infrastructure in place allows people to make different choices. And Paulo made a point yesterday that if we shift people just 1 day a week, we've just reduced our parking demand 20%.
Yeah.
If each individual makes a small change on 1 day.
Yeah. Madeline, back to you.
Tommy, some of the goals of the Medical District Collaborative are to increase density through retail, residential growth, right? But that's occurring at the same time with your other goal of reducing parking needs. Do you see those two in contrast with each other? How do those two goals for the medical district meet?
That's a good question. And what I think I would come back to is the fact that we have 270 acres of surface parking lots in the district. It's a default land banking mechanism today. And so because the district is so overparked, more or less, there's room to be able to begin to densify at the same time that we're building in these other systems, right? Because again, people think, as Suzanne was saying, people are thinking about, or used to thinking about your transportation options as, well, I drive, or maybe I might ride a bus. but it's also bike share, ride share, carpooling, van share, all these different systems that all begin to get layered together. And so as they get to be put in place in a place like the medical district, because you have the buy-in of the institutions, it can begin to reduce even more and more of that demand on surface parking lot. So that's how you start building in now on the excess parking that exists today, while at the same time you're continuing to reduce that demand on parking. So those
And of course,
dovetail together.
the best transportation solution is being there already.
Right.
So
That's right.
So so building housing and having things easily accessible by foot and being able to walk to work or walk to school in the medical district. I mean, that's a beautiful vision of what that campus could be.
And that's what helps make it more
We're going to put a
level.
map up that just shows some of the parking and some of so people get a sense of the area we're talking about and the scale of the parking that's there. But what you're not saying, just to come back to them, it's not that parking will be banned in the medical district. I mean, there has to be somebody who's listening and thinking, this guy sounds great, but I'm still going to drive from Germantown. That's where my kids have gone to school. Maybe when 8 years from now, when they're out of the house, I might want to do that. But I'm still driving. This is not an outright ban on parking.
No, this is that absolutely not. All it's trying to say is that let's just reduce our dependence on putting parking lots everywhere, because all of this is beginning to change. The technology is all these different mechanisms begin to get networked together. It's all beginning to change, and so we ought to be planning for the future.
Yeah, and I interrupted you. You were going to say something, I think, but that's okay.
No, that's all right. My point was just that I think following up on the question of the densification of having more retail, having more restaurants, really go hand in hand with making it a place that actually people want to live. That you can easily walk to a restaurant, you can being able to walk to class. That reduces, it negates the demand for parking if you're able to get more people to live close to where they want to be.
Yeah, and how much, for some people, I've been in Memphis 20 years, and, people used to talk about move downtown, live, work, play downtown. And some people, early adopters did, and then there's really quite a bit of housing, and now it's kind of boomed. I mean, the whole South Main, the Central Station project, all that. Does that, I'll turn to you, Suzanne. I mean, does that become a self-fulfilling prophecy or a virtuous circle of people saying, hey, it's working downtown, or it's working on Harbortown, or it's working in South Main, and that makes this more possible in the medical district, or it makes it more possible around Crosstown? Or does that help?
I would think so. I think when we demonstrate things, people see the value of it. That was part of the intent of MemFix, right? The program where we make quick, cheap improvements on the street, and then people see it and see that it's not that difficult and is an amenity in the neighborhood. So yeah, I think when more people are living downtown, a lot of times when I meet people who walk or bike to work, it's because they've moved into one of the new developments in the downtown area, and they're able to easily get to work.
And what about, I'm trying to think of parking. Parking's been an issue. It's been an issue around the Overton Park thing and all that. But I was also thinking about Overton Square. And the Overton Square, which I don't know if you saw it in your visit here, but is this kind of transformed neighborhood, an arts and entertainment district. It's booming. It's just busting at the seams. Central to that, and I'm going to look at you, Tommy. I'm going to put you on as an Overton Park parking expert. Central to that was, for the developers and for a lot of people, was building a very expensive parking garage. Right. And was kind of a linchpin of making that work. Is your argument in part that maybe in the future, the next Overton Square won't need that? There'll be alternatives to having to build that $5 million plus parking garage?
I think we just have to think long and hard about it, because especially the shift in technology, the autonomous vehicles, as that's beginning to come in over the next 10, 15, 20 years, some of them are already doing it today. In fact, Uber just launched 100 autonomous vehicles in Pittsburgh. No driver in this car.
Right.
And as that stuff begins to happen and all these vehicles begin to be networked, you can triple load parking. So you can park a whole lot more cars on much smaller amount of space. So it may seem a little odd or like this is way out in the future, but it's not. It's happening today. And so over the next 10, 15 years, as we're building parking lots that we hope to last 15 or 20, we have to just be aware that this stuff's happening. And so, if we are building a parking deck, let's make sure that it can be converted to something else if we don't need as much parking later.
You talk about that, and so Richard Smith, who's on the board of the zoo and was very involved in the whole debate over the Greensward, and I have to always disclose that I'm on the board of the Overton Park Conservancy, but Richard's been very public, and Richard Smith, who's Senior VP at FedEx, which knows a little about transportation and logistics and follows Uber, he made a lot of those points in that whole discussion about what the future parking needs would be, is that more and more people, they see at FedEx, they're going to be coming to places like forget the zoo and the whole fight, but coming to a place like Overton Square, the zoo, wherever, in autonomous vehicles or in Uber and so on, or that everything's changing, and that's their orientation. Madeline, I'll go back to you.
Suzanne, I think what's interesting about the medical district is, as you said, it's a case study, right? You're layering on top of each other some of the latest advances in land use planning, and we can really sort of see these new strategies take hold in a thoughtful way Memphis really hasn't grown, in that direction before. Are there any strategies that are being employed in the medical district do you think could translate to a larger scale across Memphis, or are they so specific to the geographic area and the partners there?
It's all transferable, and we're, as Tommy said, really just starting the conversation with the medical district. So for our program commute options that you mentioned before, we're willing to work with any Memphis employer, really. We're picking a few as pilots who are larger institutions that have the buy-in and that want to try out some of these things. But really, anything that happens in the medical district, as far as I can tell, is something that could happen elsewhere. I think they have a great asset in being having land that could be repurposed and bring a lot of assets into a more central city area. So there may be locations like warehouse districts that may not be as amenable to putting the restaurants and coffee shops and those kind of things that you would walk to. But I do think a lot of our strategies will be for everybody.
When you talk about strategies for different places, I think it was in your article, Madeline, that you referenced, there's like the Blue Line at U of M. The U of M has its own, transportation there. And there's even the RU in Midtown that goes from Cooper Young over. These kind of private or quasi-private entities that fill in gaps of MATA. I mean, is that typical in other cities? That,
very much
even a city like Seattle that has a very good, well-developed bus system, there's still some private or quasi-private niches that have to be filled.
Yeah, so that last mile to transit question is a big one for many cities, and I think that will be something that will be talked about here. And how can big institutional players collaborate to make sure that people have a seamless and really high quality experience to get to the transit that runs frequently and that runs reliably from their employment locations? And that could take the form of shuttles, it could take the form of carpools, it could be thinking more. Even I like to think about how institutions can invest in the walking and biking environment outside of their boundaries to make it easier for people to get there.
Suzanne mentioned bike share, and it's gotten some press, but I don't think people in Memphis are fully aware that in 2017 we'll have a bike share program. 60 locations? I'm looking at you like you would know. 60 locations across the city, and bike share. If you've been in other cities, people who have. I mean, it's shared bikes. You put on a credit card or whatever, and you can take that bike from one place to the next. In Seattle's had that for some time, I imagine.
Right. And Seattle Children's Hospital was one of the main sponsors of the bike
To what
share
extent do people use it for work? I mean, is that, and I'm putting you on the spot, I mean, is there a sense, even an anecdotal sense that people frequently use those for work, or are they more kind of weekend bike shares, or how are they used?
I think that it serves both markets, so that it's an amazing thing for tourists. And you can imagine here, for example, being able to go from Sun Studios to the Civil Rights Museum and sort of do that circuit that people do by shuttle now or drive to in a really healthy way.
Right.
But I think a lot of people do in many bike share cities commute using the bike share.
Yeah, go ahead.
As I said, there's a lot of different trips that people take within the day. So even if you are an employee, you may take your car in or take a bus into work, and you might use bike share to go to lunch. And that would save you a trip in your car. So it's not the answer, it's part of the answer, right? Because the answer is this multifaceted, multimodal approach, and it's just one layer.
Yeah. Well, we'll stick with you for a second. We're doing it backwards. We did a show, I think I was looking in February. It seemed like it was more recent, but when the Memphis Medical District Collaborative was started. Right. Talk about what, besides this parking issue, it isn't just about parking. No. There are all kinds of other things. So people who aren't familiar with what you guys are doing, tell us about it.
Sure, and the Medical District Collaborative, the goal of the organization is to think about how do we strengthen the communities between and around these 8 major anchor institutions that are in the district, and we're supported by the 8 anchor institutions in the district. So when we think about that, it's a comprehensive strategy. We have to think about where people are living, where people are playing, where people are working. So it's a housing strategy, right? There's a safety security strategy. It's the #1 issue in the district right now. The programming and marketing, making sure we're doing events in the district that are pulling people out of the buildings and into the public spaces. To respond to that, you also have to have a top-notch public spaces in the district. And then sort of underlying all of that, of course, is the real estate development and getting the right types of development in the right types of places, the right mix of affordable housing and other types of housing in single family, but also in multifamily. And then how do you knit it all together? And that's where the transportation piece comes in.
And
right?
you've got streetscape. I mean, I will say they're simple things, and they're not simple, but streetscape and other kind of improvements are on deck or have started?
Are on deck. They're starting very soon. The city is in the process of repaving many of the streets in the district, and as soon after that, what you'll begin to see are these subtle interventions. So it's not we don't have the budget today to blow out all the sidewalks and all the curbs and redo everything just like we might want it, but what we can do is identify those key intersections where people are and make improvements. And again, it's not the MemFix $500 in paint and showing you what you could do. It's like the in between. So what could you do with really proper planters, proper seating, right amount of new modern crosswalks, all that kind of stuff.
Right. And just a minute less than a minute. Innovate Memphis does, for people who aren't familiar, give us the 30-second summary of what you all do.
We work on civic solutions, so we look at what the issue is, maybe redefine the issue sometimes from parking into what are the other choices people could use, and then we design solutions, look at best practices from around the city. So for example, Paolo's helping us with best practices from Children's Hospital, and then we work with institutions in the city to roll out solutions.
All right, well, thank you all for being here. I want to thank Madeline. Madeline has been a reporter with us for a year or two, but is moving on to High Ground News to be managing editor.
Thank you,
Congratulations, but you've said you'll be a part of the show going forward, so we look forward to that. All right, thank you all for being here. Thank you for joining us. Join us again next week.